My apologies, you guys. I've got to put this on. It didn't start up like it was supposed to. And Mike Rivero on American Rock Radio. We had a technical problem there. This was recorded earlier. Here you go. Hey everybody, welcome back to American Rock Radio on Mojo 50 and the Stu Peters Network on Rumble and 500 million different podcast sites. And we have my old friend Mike Rivero. You remember him from several shows ago. I've introduced him before. He's done all kinds of really, really cool work. This guy, I Googled you today, Mike, and there is a Portuguese language fan site for the TV show Lost, where it's got like a little bio on you, and it talks about how you were in the commentaries on the and the DVD specials and things like that. So that was kind of cool. But Mike Rivero has a very dynamic brain, and he's somebody that I was listening to probably 15, almost 20 years ago now. I was going to work, and I would listen to What Really Happened radio. I would download the podcast, and I would listen to Mike. And back then I would listen to InfoWars. And that's one of the reasons why I got you on today, because this whole thing with Israel is really blowing up, Mike. And you were somebody that was very critical of the policy of the Israeli government. You've been following the career of Benjamin Netanyahu and people like him for a very long time. The cartoon bomb, if you remember that. They were always
that one.
Iran is always this close to annihilating us and so forth. And so back then, you had a lot of contact with people like Ryan Dawson, and that's how I know about a lot of these guys. And Ryan's actually accumulated he has stuck to his guns on the issue of what's going on in Gaza and Israel this whole time, and he's accumulated a following out of it. Are you still in contact with Ryan at all? Do you guys ever talk?
Oh yeah, we trade emails all the time, and I've known Ryan for many, many years. And I first met him in relation to his and his brother's work on the lost colony of Roanoke. And over the years, he's become more political. And we actually got together briefly when we were in Hawaii, and he shared his family with us, and we had a really good time. But yeah, Ryan is definitely one of the good guys.
Yeah. Okay, good. And the other thing too is that the reason that I knew that you existed and what turned me on to your work in the first place is because you were a semi-regular contributor on the Alex Jones show. Back when he was on Genesis Communications Network, you were with Republic Broadcast. And I remember hearing you being brought on the show, and I remember Alex's tone. A lot has changed since then. None of us are the same exact person we were in those days, least of all me. But Alex's tone towards you shifted over time. I remember hearing it in his voice, and all of a sudden, after a while, you were kind of persona non grata when it came to InfoWars. And so that, I'm guessing, was largely due to the issue of your stance on government policy when it came to Israel.
That's absolutely correct. And as a matter of fact, the timeline is a little bit different. When I was a guest on Alex Jones' show, I didn't have my own radio show, and he helped me get a show on Genesis.
Okay.
And then we definitely locked horns on the issue of Israel. And eventually I drifted away from Genesis and I went to Republic. Then I went back to Genesis, then I went to TogiNet, then I went here and there and everywhere, and finally back to Republic, which I stayed with up until just recently. But, being that I'm getting on in years, and, I don't have the energy that I used to have, I wanted to focus back on the original website, whatreallyhappened.com, which is really where it all began from. And because of upgrades to various background coat. I had to redesign the site earlier, well, actually last year now, and get that up and running. And I'm really spending all of my time on that. And of course, hanging out with my lovely wife, Claire, who's very much involved musically with her local church.
Nice. Yeah, I've listened to some of Claire's compositions, and she's very talented. And
Yes, she is.
you have always expressed a whole lot of love and gratitude towards your wife, and that's a good thing to see in a marriage. Most marriages don't last very long these days, and I'm glad that yours has. So that is
Yeah,
definitely.
we just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary, and we're looking forward to another 30.
Well, that is definitely to your credit. I want to bring something up. We'll get into all these things too, but you got a damaged condition from a vaccine, one that I had not heard of, and we brought this up when we were talking earlier, and I didn't want to bring it up if it was something you wanted to keep private, but I did notice that you have lost a significant amount of weight. Your face is thinned out quite a bit. Not that you were ever fatty fat or anything like that, but you have
Oh,
lost
I
weight.
was. Back when I was working on Lost, I weighed almost 300 pounds.
Did you? Oh, I didn't see that.
Oh, yeah. You know,
Really?
every time I go down and sunbathe on the beaches of Hawaii, Greenpeace would try and put me back in the water. So, but yeah, I got this vaccine injury. It's a condition called polymyalgia rheumatica, and it attacks the skeletal muscles, mostly through the mitochondria, which, as you know, have their own DNA, and a hyperactive immune system can see them as an infection and go after them. And that's kind of what I was dealing with. And my weight went down to 137 pounds. I was in a nursing home for several weeks learning how to walk again. My weight is back up to 160. But you know, it's just something I'm going to have to live with from now on. And you know, you can't sue the vaccine makers; they're totally indemnified, and so they don't really have an incentive to make sure their products are safe before they go out into the pharmacies. They're just there to get the product out the door, get it sold, get our money, and you know, TV and movies try and show us that the medical industry is full of people who care. And for the most part, that's true at the lower levels. But when you get to the top of those corporate structures, they really, you know, they're not that concerned with the quality of care for the patients. In fact, the medical industrial complex doesn't want a healthy population any more than the defense contractors want world peace. It's bad for business. And if you look at the Sackler family and that whole Purdue opioid scandal, you begin to realize that top management of these pharmaceutical companies is operating in the same moral level as that guy down there by the liquor store who's selling meth or fentanyl.
Yeah, they're out of Indiana, aren't they?
I don't actually recall. They're here in Indiana, but I don't know if this is their corporate headquarters.
Okay, I thought I seem to recall that family was based at that all kind of centered around the state of Indiana. Not that it matters. I mean, it's been a worldwide thing, and I mean, the whole opioid crisis, and then you look at the invasion of Afghanistan, and I mean, everything ties in. And it's funny because now I see people that like I got to admit, okay, because I was listening to you and Infowars and Alan Watt, James Corbett, people like that, like every day for years, I was listening to probably 6 hours of this style of information. And so what happened was I got full. Like I was full. Like like when you can't look at food because you've had too much to eat. And so when people would you know, and then I got my own show. I ended up on GCN talking about the very things that you're talking about with pharmaceutical companies, and I was hosting for a naturopathic doctor out of Chicago, who is an expert on non-drug and surgical medical interventions. But so I was like full, and I was on a mission to wake people up to, you know, 9/11 was an inside job. The Bushes aren't really the best people, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so what happened was over time got to the point where I just almost kind of lost the ability to care about any of that stuff anymore because it just, do you understand what I'm saying? And then
Yeah,
it
it's
was
called
like,
burnout, and it's
yeah,
easy to burn out on this stuff. And
right.
Claire helps me with the website, and so there are some days where she says I can't look at this stuff anymore,
Yeah,
because it is so overwhelming.
right, exactly. And then there was like a new generation that came along, and all of a sudden they were blown away and all wide-eyed like I was. And so like I had people coming to me and saying, "Did you know that 9/11 was an inside job?" And it's like I was freaked out about that 15 years ago. Okay. So like
Yes.
get out of my face. I don't want to hear what you have to say. You know what I mean? So like, I kind of looked at the generation that I somehow helped to create, and I thought, what have I done? And you know what I mean? But I don't know. There was kind of a weird dynamic there. But hey, we got what we wanted. Everybody's talking about it. Let's go to talking about the situation with Israel, because you have been following this very closely for for many years, and let's just talk about the evolution of it. And like I said, guys like Ryan are out there now, and suddenly they're getting very popular. The guy that started the channel that I'm on, Stu Peters, he has picked up the ball and ran with the whole Israel thing. And just I'd like you're kind of an old gunfighter when it comes to this sort of thing, and so I'd like to get your perspective on how you've seen the conversation evolve and shape, and what's happening right now. Mike, you have the floor.
Well, obviously, decades ago, back to when Israel basically grabbed half of Palestine. And by the way, Britain did not really have the authority to give any portion of Palestine away to anybody else. But one thing the Israelis are really good at is propaganda. They know that they need to basically get into positions of influence in the media and finance in order to control society. In fact, there are a lot of historical parallels between what's been going on here in the United States for the last few decades, more than that actually, for half a century, and what was going on in Germany prior to World War II. And so, there could be another backlash, and a lot of people could get hurt. And it's being made worse by the fact that Israel's government, which is what sets these policies regarding the Palestinians, is trying to hide behind the world's Jewish people with this claim all the time that criticism of Israel's government is hatred of the Jews. It's anti-Semitism, which makes as much sense as claiming that criticism of Adolf Hitler just means we hate the German people.
Yeah.
He didn't really do anything wrong. You just hate the German people.
Right.
And it's silly, but Israel gets away with it. They're very good at figuring out how to brainwash the population. And despite the fact that they have been the aggressors, not just against Palestine, but Egypt and Lebanon and Syria, they've still managed to convince the world that somehow they are the victims. Pay no attention to those 100 nuclear bombs we've got over there. We're just helpless victims fighting for survival. And unfortunately, a lot of people have bought into that. But with the rise of the independent media, the story is changing. People have lost all trust in the corporate legacy media. They don't believe anything the government says anymore. So they're coming to shows like yours, websites like mine, and they're reading what's going on. They're watching what's happening right now in Israel and Gaza. And, what's really got a lot of Israel supporters scared is they've lost control of the narrative. They really thought they were going to be able to repeat this idea that even as Israel is just, wiping out all these women and children, that they have to do it for self-defense. We're the victims. We have a right to exist. These other countries in the Middle East, they don't have a right to exist, but Israel does. And unfortunately, that double standard is what lies behind all this horrible bloodshed that's been going on, because Israel wants a right to exist. I don't have a problem with that myself. The problem I have is that Israel doesn't want to recognize anybody else's right to exist, especially the Palestinians.
Do you remember Congressman James Traficant?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was something that really, just following that little, and he was hilarious, by the way. Like, he was really fun, and The beautiful thing about him was that he was a Democrat from Ohio, and the partisanship that is so divisive today didn't. Have you noticed that Democrats have really changed since then? I mean, the whole thing with the Democrat Party has just shifted so much. They used to be the anti war, anti-Iraq war. You had Code Pink, you had the Democrat Party was always about peace and anti-big government and warmongering.
Ah, those were the days. And
Yeah,
but yeah, it's almost like the Republicans and Democrats have swapped sides. Where
yeah,
now it's the Republicans saying, let's pull back on all of this bloodshed and stop wagging our nukes at each other before something really bad happens.
right, right. You brought up Hitler, and you just passively mentioning how, like, saying that being critical of his policies as a government official would be akin to disliking, saying, "Well, you just hate Germans." There's actually kind of a collective guilt on Germans to this day that has been held over their heads
Yes.
for the things that happened 80 years ago. Can you speak to that?
Well, again, that's part of Israel's propaganda machine to say that, everybody's collectively guilty. Israel is still insisting that even though we won the war against Germany at great cost in blood and treasure, that we didn't do enough. And that's why we have to feel guilty about the Holocaust and go on giving Israel lots of money and unquestioned support and more weapons with which they can defeat those evil Palestinians who want to come on in and throw Jewish babies into the ovens again. But I reject the idea of collective guilt. I refuse to be guilty for anything that is not under my direct control. Certainly, I am not guilty for anything that happened before I was born, nor will I accept guilt for anything that happens after I die.
Yeah.
And we need to get rid of that concept of collective guilt because it's not just poisoning the discussion regarding Israel and the Middle East, but it's become central to the argument for slavery reparations, which has reached this ridiculous situation in California where they're going to take money away from people who've never owned slaves to give to people who never were slaves in a state that never allowed slavery to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's just another attempt by the Democrats to buy the black vote because a lot of the black voters are now shifting toward the Republican Party. And what the black voters need to understand is the Democrats will go on saying reparations, reparations, reparations until the election. And the moment the election is over, oh, we just don't have the money. We spent it all on the illegal immigrants. And gosh, gee, we really meant to give you reparations, but, we had to prioritize.
Yeah, we've got that victim mentality. It seems to win. Hey, it's almost weaponized, like you said. They'll play the victim card, but it's we have the same thing going on in Canada right now, actually, with all this stuff with the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, and I know people that own a lake lot. Okay, just they're not rich, maybe somebody who's an accountant or something like that. These are not like who you'd consider to be uber wealthy people. They're well off, right? But they now have natives who are being convinced by NGOs that their land was stolen from them from things that happened before they were born. And so now I know people who if they go to the grocery store, they've got thugs following them around, intimidating them because you own a lot near this lake and that's traditional land if you go back 150, 200 years ago. And what these guys don't understand is that the people that are convincing you of taking this land, they're not going to let you have it. They're using you. They're going to throw you away like a used moist towelette when you have helped them get the hard assets or the land. And it's always that way. But people, the Bible says covetousness. When you're covetous, you can be tricked into doing something against your best interest, but it's a bad deal based on a false promise.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And that's what politicians do. They make promises. Oh, vote for me, and
Yeah.
I'll take something away from these people to give to you, or I'll tell you that because of slavery, you have a right to loot stores and rob people, and we're going to promise we're not going to send you to jail. Which we're seeing a lot of that mentality here in the United States, where um, black criminals are just being let go. The media is covering up for them. We've got a real problem going on right now that police records of black offenders are listing their race as white.
I
And
saw
there are
that. Yeah.
examples appearing all over social media. They're deliberately trying to skew the data to make it look like white people are the problem. And that is just not so.
There's going to be a backlash with all of that. Like, I mean, Charles Manson, if you look at what him and the family did, and if you look at his writings and his philosophy, they were trying to kick off a race war, and it's
Yes.
almost like we're being our governments are a bunch of, they're like the Manson family, like they're trying to egg people into doing something crazy. If you look at this situation in Athens, Georgia, with this girl that was murdered by this Venezuelan immigrant, let me give you an example, okay? We had just recently, right near where I live, somebody stole a U-Haul truck and rammed it into a RCMP car just down the street from me, drove it into the city of Edmonton, about 1 million people in central Alberta. And the Edmonton police put out a spike belt. Somebody got out and they ran over it, a mother that was headed up a food bank in a suburb, and she was hit by the perpetrator and killed. Well, they wouldn't put out the race or any kind of identifying factor as to the person that was that they were looking for still in this situation. And so a lot of people on social media were coming in and commenting on the story, saying that jumping to the conclusion that this was most likely somebody that was an immigrant or somebody from Africa or the Middle East, because we have had that happen here before, and they did refuse to put the race or any kind of identifying factor, skin color, things like that, of the perpetrator on the report. Well, when they finally did put out the report, it turned out the guy was white, and they used that to, see, you jumped to the conclusion that this person was somehow an immigrant, therefore you are Hitler and need to be killed and imprisoned and censored. But the fact is, they created a situation in the first place through their own reporting where people, you can't blame them for jumping to that conclusion, because that's what, in fact, they've been doing, if you follow what I'm saying.
Well, this is all part of a plan by the government to keep us divided against each other. The one thing the government is most afraid of is that we, the American people, will recognize we are one American people and unite together against the real cause of all of our problems, which, of course, is, the politicians. And there's nothing new in this. If you go back and look at the history of COINTELPRO in the 1960s, the FBI was working to deliberately fan up racial tensions between the black community and the white community, the most egregious example of which was the FBI's Black Panther coloring book, which was this coloring book of illustrations where the police were all depicted as pigs.
Yeah.
The pictures depicted black people killing the police, and it just really caused an inflammatory reaction among the population. And of course, the drawings weren't all that good anyway. They didn't have the characteristic closed spaces for coloring, and that was what made a lot of people really suspicious. But when the scandal broke in the 1970s, Congress had to investigate, because the exposure that the FBI was doing things like this brought the government to the edge of illegitimacy. And so the government had to go harumph, and we're going to fix this, and we're going to get back to being the country we were supposed to be, which they never did. And so there was the Black Panther coloring book. There was the destruction of the career of Jean Seberg, who was supporting the civil rights movement. She was a very famous actress in Europe and the United States. And they smeared her and destroyed her career. And they were doing all kinds of stuff like that. And it continues to this very day.
You know, that is a sad commentary that a bunch of adults could be whipped up by a coloring book. I mean, that's that. You would think that that's some pretty stupid, horrible, like just dumb propaganda. Like a lot of propaganda is just stupid. It appeals to base emotions. If somebody
Yes.
took 12 seconds to look at it and think critically, like, or but to take something like a and the whole, you know, like pictures of the cops being pigs in this coloring book, and I mean that like carried over into the whole gangster rap thing in the 90s. You had Cypress Hill writing songs called pigs about cops, and it becomes part of the nomenclature. But the fact that you could take something as dumb as a coloring book and whip people up into fighting, hating, and killing one another, and I love the United States of America. I do. I've never stopped loving America. My dad was in the U.S. Army. He's from Chicago. I was raised loving the United States of America. I was, but she's in bad shape.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. And of course, there's nothing wrong with the country or the people. It is the fact that government and the legacy media are trying to whip up as much chaos and confusion as they can. We have that open borders crisis, which led to that tragedy in Georgia. And I think there's been something like 5 of these deaths in the last 5 days. You have this whole LGBTQ transgender in the grade school situation. And, everybody's screaming about my pronoun this and my pronoun that. And by the way, for future reference, my pronouns are sir and lord. So,
Lord, sir.
Yeah, something like that. And
Is that with a capital?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And you look at all this stuff, transgender men competing with real biological women in sports and cheating them out of awards and scholarships. And, the country is going to heck in a handbasket, but by golly, we're going to make sure that men can use the ladies' room if they feel like it.
Yeah.
And it's just one chaotic distraction after another. And of course, Afghanistan was a disaster. We didn't do all that well in Iraq. Iraq wants us to leave now. And for all the money we've sent to Ukraine, some of which has now come back as payback and kickbacks to various politicians, but we're not going to be able to win there. We cannot possibly defeat Russia in Ukraine without risking a world war, and yet they keep on pushing this, and everybody's making money off of it. The COVID vaccines. Most of our inner circle politicians, especially Dr. Fauci, were investing in the pharmaceutical companies, a month before COVID was announced to the public. And then everybody panicked and they went to get the vaccines, and people with stock in those companies became very rich. If you look at members of Congress, how much their personal net worth is versus what they actually get paid to be a member of Congress, you begin to realize that the numbers just don't add up. Something else is going on. And so there's a tremendous amount of corruption going on. And everybody's doing this nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, and tolerating each other's corruption. They don't want to expose it because they run the risk of exposing their own. Then we have this whole Jeffrey Epstein situation. And anybody who went down there to that island or to the house in Florida or the one in New York and anything had to know they were going to be recorded having sex with underage children, which would leave them wide open to blackmail. And you've got to be really kind of stupid to go ahead and go along with that, knowing the risk it carries. But some of these people are just so arrogant, they're detached from reality, and they're saying, well, it's not going to happen to me. I've got too much influence and power, and I can survive this kind of thing. But I notice that there's now a push to accept pedophilia, or what they call minor attracted persons. And maybe that is being promoted out of a fear that some of these videos are going to be leaked out. Now, down in Florida, DeSantis has just signed a law that is going to start releasing some, actually all of the files from the 2006 investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. So we're going to start getting some of the names of the customers and who were involved in that thing. And of course, after Epstein was suicided, all the computers and recording devices and everything from his island home, they just vanished, and we don't know who has them. Could be Mossad, could be FBI, could be CIA, could be all three together, and they're using those videos and recordings to tell various politicians, okay, this is how you're going to vote, and this is what you're going to do. And that's the end of the republic.
The very nature of that information. So like you can, so let's say you printed a report saying, let's just, for example, Will Smith or Hillary Clinton or Chris Rock, whoever, right? Some celebrity that everybody loves and a politician or whatever. Okay, so you print a report that, they were at this island and they did X, right? And it was horrible. You write it out, you explain it, but you have to have evidence to go into court, right? You have to have evidence to actually convict somebody. And just possessing said video is kryptonite. Like I remember when people were during the lockdowns and when people were, you had that whole QAnon movement where everybody was kind of getting wise to or talking about it anyway, how that these politicians and celebrities were involved in these nefarious activities. And once in a while, you would get people saying, I found a video of Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin eating a young girl's face, and it's on the dark web, and you can get it here. And I'm thinking to myself, number one, you going to tell people to download that? Like, it's illegal just to have it, first of all. Second of all, it's to use that, to have that evidence, it is so horrible and so awful that, like, how would you prosecute that, and who can you even show it to? Maybe I'm being naive here, but did you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's
well, you don't have to take them into court, and unfortunately, as we've been seeing in the case of Donald Trump, our judges are proving to be just as corrupt as members of Congress. But exposure of these tapes, could destroy somebody in the court of public opinion. That being said, in this age of artificial intelligence, we have to be very, very careful about what we're looking at. We've already seen some fakes, when they started talking about Michelle Obama actually being a guy. And they said, there are no pictures of her pregnant. And the next day, a couple of pictures came out showing a pregnant Michelle Obama, but there were obvious problems with it. Like one of her hands had 6 fingers. That's a dead giveaway that you're looking at an AI image.
Well, now she might have 6 fingers on one.
I don't think so.
The benefit of it
there were other reasons to suspect it was AI.
She's Nephilim.
There was a photograph of Donald Trump supposedly with Jeff Epstein and a bunch of girls on the airplane. That was an AI fake as well. So you really need to learn how to look for the little giveaways in these AI images.
You're a special effects guy, and you've worked on a lot of these ways of fooling people into seeing. Maybe you should put together some kind of a course. This could be a really good business for you to train people on what to look for when looking at AI.
I've been thinking about that. Right now, the technology is evolving so fast. It is, what works today will not work tomorrow. I'm sure they're already writing code to make sure that they don't accidentally put additional fingers on hands and things like that. So, but we need to learn how to discern these things. There need to be some tools that will actually analyze these images and look for disparities between what's in the image and what should be there in real life. And one good giveaway is the scanner or CCD noise that you see on images. In the good old days, it used to be film grain. But with the modern digital cameras like, you have, on your cell phone, They take very, very good pictures, but the low order bits are always very noisy because of static charge, cosmic rays, various other things. If that noise is absent from an image you're being shown, that image is definitely fake. That's one way that you can
Ah,
tell. But
okay.
of course, next week they'll just write code to add noise to those low order bits to try and get away from that.
Right.
Yep.
There'll always be some telltale signature. I mean, they'll always be trying to laying on a bed with a blanket that's too small. You pull it up and the feet are exposed. You pull it down and the head's exposed. You can't. There's always with lies. There's always something exposed, and they're going to be running around playing whack-a-mole with it. So,
Yes.
if you remember, President Obama made a statement. My biggest fear is that there'll be video made by somebody of me doing something horrible that I didn't actually do. And a lot of people speculated at that time that was him kind of getting ahead of something
Yep.
that was coming out at the time. If you could speak to that.
But it's a real possibility.
Yeah.
And we've entered an era where video and photos may no longer be considered courtroom worthy evidence because you can't trust them. I've sort of grown up with this technology. I started with visual effects, back in the days where we still shooting with film, motion control cameras and things like that. And I've watched the technology evolve, and it's really very, very good. I'm playing with a little bit of it myself, just for the fun of it. But yeah, it's evolving so rapidly. It's kind of hard to come up with any kind of a definitive measure that says, yes, this is artificial intelligence.
Right. No kidding. Let's move on to the border. You had brought that up in our conversation before we got together here today. This is amazing. I've never seen anything like this with the sheer volume of people that have been coming. I mean, it's been happening for quite a long time. I remember when I was a kid, there was the video of Born in East LA by Cheech Marin when he green card. I don't need no green card. Right. And there was always kind of a joking about illegal immigrants coming across the southern border. But I don't think anybody really envisioned the sheer scale that we're seeing today when we see these.
Oh, it's an absolute invasion. I mean, there's always been a problem with people sneaking into the country. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, actually rounded up all the illegal immigrants in his administration with a very small
Operation Wetback.
Yeah, Operation Wetback.
Yeah.
And but today it's very obvious that the Biden White House wants these borders kept open. They want the fentanyl to flood into this country. They want the illegal immigrants to come on in. And they're already talking about, well, we have to let them vote this November, which they're not allowed to vote. It's a felony for an illegal immigrant to vote in federal elections. And so they're going to try and say, well, we can't exclude them from the democratic process. They're here, illegal or not. And then they're trying to sell that already in the hope that the illegal immigrant vote is going to make up for some of the losses they're suffering in the black vote. But it's election interference. It's illegal under Title VIII. Everything they're doing is considered a crime punishable by jail. And we simply can't afford this anymore. I mean, we have all of these sanctuary cities, they're running out of money. And, there's a disaster looming on the horizon, because what happens when the government does run out of money to feed and house these illegal immigrants? They're not just going to walk back across the border and go home. They're going to turn to crime, and many of them are criminals. One of the reasons we're having problems with these illegal immigrants committing rapes and robberies is these other countries are taking advantage of this opportunity. They're simply emptying out their prisons, taking them to the border and say, go that way. And that's not unexpected. When the U.S. government allowed Cuban refugees to come into Florida, Castro emptied out the Cuban prisons, put them all on boats and said 90 miles that way. And Florida was hit with this major crime wave. Now, to illustrate how dramatic this is working, Venezuela is now claiming their violent crime rate is at a 22-year low.
I saw that.
Because all their violent criminals are here.
Right.
and it's unsustainable. This is not going to end well.
Meanwhile, Venezuela is actually talking about going to war with their neighbor. And have you been following that situation at all?
Yeah, I have, and a lot has to do with oil and access to oil and gas, and
Yep.
that's also a motive in the Israel versus Gaza situation, because there's like a huge natural gas deposit that was discovered off the coast of Gaza, and under international law, it belongs to Gaza. Gaza has not been able to exploit it because Israel would not allow them to import the piping and drilling equipment necessary to tap into that resource. But when Israel drives the Gazans into Egypt and annexes the territory, then they get that natural gas. They'll build a pipeline up to Europe, and Europe will gratefully buy this gas from Israel to make up for the loss of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, because right now they're having to buy liquefied natural gas from the United States, which is really expensive and is causing all kinds of economic hardship.
Well, see, you just described Alberta, where I live, because right in Alberta and Western Canada in general, but specifically Alberta, I think we have the third largest reserves of oil and natural gas on the planet. So, I mean, like, we literally have enough just here, not to never mind what's in Oklahoma, Texas, but the United States of America could quite honestly, and Canada, be self-sustaining for like 100,000 years or some crazy thing. But again, policy out of the government in Eastern Canada or Ottawa seeks to suppress that because of climate change, of course. While at the same time they're going after farmers. We have a new bill being passed through the Canadian Parliament, basically saying that if you use the wrong words online, they can put you in jail for life, and it's retroactive, like meaning they can go back through your online footprint for your as long as you've had an internet connection, and bring up something and prosecute you for it. Have you heard anything about that?
I've heard about that. I've heard about a similar law that's under discussion in France that if you question the mRNA vaccines, it can carry up to a 3-year prison sentence. Here in the United States, there is thankfully a provision in the Constitution called ex post facto, which means a law cannot be passed that punishes you for a previous behavior.
Mm.
So clearly somebody needs to establish that principle in Canada. And, you know,
How does that work with the statute of limitations, say, in a murder case, though? I mean, like, what does that all cover, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, there's already a law against murder. Like, let's say somebody passes a law saying it's illegal to tap dance barefoot on shag carpeting. And the fact that last week I was tap dancing barefoot on shag carpeting,
that sounds like
not be prosecuted for that under ex post facto.
Okay, I understand what you're saying now. All right, that makes sense. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely. But I mean, here's the other thing too. It's almost like they probe with these laws, and then when there's public outrage, they go, "Just kidding, you know, we can't do that. We're a democracy."
No, they're trying to find how much they can get away with. You know, and it's kind of a game of chicken. Keep pushing until it looks like they're going to trigger a revolution, and then they back off. And of course, while we're not getting a lot of coverage of it in the legacy media, there are massive protests all over Europe against these climate gate policies, and they're getting really, shall we say, energetic. And of course, you had your truckers protests over COVID that Trudeau, I think, came down excessively hard on. And we have truckers in our country going down to support the closing the border. So people are finally standing up and saying, you know, I'm mad as heck and I'm not going to take it anymore.
You also had them truckers boycotting bringing goods into New York City. I haven't heard anything about that.
I have not heard how well that's doing or not. I know it started out but I think the mayor of New York City, Governor Hochul, came on out and said, if you refuse to bring goods here, we will confiscate your bank account, seize your home, and a bunch of
same playbook as
the same playbook as Trudeau.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, real lack of creativity. In fact, I know most of the people that were involved in that trucker convoy. I also know the guys that they used. They're really smart, but kind of a bunch of idiots at the same time, and they're internet comedians. And they made up a fictional country called Diagolon. So Diagolon is basically a diagonal line across North America from Alberta to Texas. And so let's make this a new country. We'll call it Diagolon, right? And the LGBT crowd and Democrats in general and people that are for open borders can have the coastal areas, and we'll, you know what I mean, because Idaho, Alberta, Texas, it's all kind of conservative anyway. Well, they all of a sudden they at the Coots border at southern Alberta here, they were finding Diagolon patches on backpacks and planting guns and right. And these guys are not a threat to national security. They're not a threat to anybody's security. Like honestly, they're kind of a bunch of dumbasses. They're talented. They're smart. I like them, but they're definitely not Dr. Evil's terrorist organization hiding in a volcano somewhere.
Yeah.
So it was ridiculous in the first place, and I think that's what they're using for this new speech bill with the internet is these same guys again because they haven't backed down at all. I'm not really a part of all that anymore. I'm actually a preacher now, Mike. I have a little church where I'm a Pentecostal preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I do a lot of Bible study. This is a rare occasion that you're getting me talking about politics. Actually, very rare because I stay away from it these days. But I've always liked you, Mike. I like your brain, and so I wanted to hear what you think about things. We've got about 15 minutes left in this interview. Time has gone really quickly, and I've really enjoyed sitting down with you. We've talked about a myriad of topics. I'm going to let you take the direction. With the last little bit here, what else is on your radar that you would like to bring to people's attention that we have not gone over?
Well, obviously, a major problem that we're all dealing with is a very fragile economy. We have a government which cumulatively takes about 40% of our income in taxes, and there's still $34 trillion in debt. And it's kind of interesting. In ancient Egypt, the Egyptian slaves had to give Pharaoh just 20% of their work product. And so we're way past that. We're approaching that 50% for ourselves and 50% for the masters that you saw with the Roman slaves or the medieval serfs or even the plantation slaves in the antebellum South. And so we're economic slaves, and it all goes back to that private central bank, which was not what this country started to do. In fact, the American Revolution was fought to free us from private central banking. I know they don't teach that in the schools, especially since 1913. But if you go back and you read the writings of Ben Franklin, he says one of the major reasons for the war was King George III's refusal to allow this country to operate an honest monetary system. And so once the revolution was over, the private central bankers tried to worm their way back on in. There was the First Bank of the United States. It immediately started enriching itself at the expense of the American people. So Congress revoked their charter, and the bankers just, screamed at that and threatened, if you don't renew the charter, you will find yourself in war. Congress stood firm, and so the bankers went to King George III and offered to finance an invasion of the United States to recolonize them at virtually zero interest. That was too good an offer for King George to pass up, and that's what led us to the War of 1812. And even though ultimately we won that war, it plunged the government into so much debt, they were forced to start the Second Bank of the United States, which went back to its evil ways of enriching itself at the expense of the American people. Until Andrew Jackson campaigned on Jackson and no bank and succeeded in getting it shut down. And it should be noted, Andrew Jackson was the last president to actually pay off the national debt. Immediately after he shut down the bank, there was an assassination attempt on his life that failed. The guns jammed. And then going up to 1913 and the creature from Jekyll Island, the bankers wanted to start the third bank of the United States, but instead they called it the Federal Reserve to make it sound like it was part of the government. But it isn't. It's a privately owned central bank. It's no more federal than Federal Express. And ever since then, the nation has been plunging deeper and deeper into debt because the whole model of the private central bank is it generates more debt than money with which to pay the debt. So the debt can never be paid off. It's constantly going to grow until finally the hard assets and real wealth of the country winds up in the pockets of the bankers. It's a very predatory system. And, they've got enough money to buy the politicians to say, this is we're going to go along with this. Yeah.
You owe me something. It always comes back to that with the description of the situation with the natives here, and if you own a lake lot, that's mine, and you owe me, or slavery 200 years ago, that's you owe me something for that. No matter what anybody does today, or this, it always comes back to some form of debt. Always.
It really does. And there was a movie that came out some years ago called The International, and the storyline involves a bank that's gotten itself involved in gun running, and the people investigating it are trying to figure out what's going on. Is this bank trying to control this conflict? And there's this other banker who's explaining to them, no, this bank is a bank. They're interested in money, and they don't want to control the conflict. They want to control the debt the conflict produces, because the real value of a conflict is the debt it creates. And if you control that debt, you control everything. And he says, you may not like it, but it is the very essence of the banking system to keep us all, whether we are nations or individuals, slaves to debt. And that's exactly what they're doing. They don't want you to be able to operate without them.
Where do you see it going? Do you think that it's a kind of a thing where there's just going to be a collapse and all of a sudden nobody can buy anything? Do you think it'll go full Argentina or Venezuela, or and if that happens, I mean, you have the BRICS nations and this alternative monetary system being set up and cooperative amongst these countries, but a lot of countries still rely on the U.S. dollar and Bretton Woods, and I mean, where do you see it going, Mike?
Well, Bretton Woods effectively ended when Richard Nixon ended cold convertibility, the Nixon shock. So Bretton Woods, they'll pay it lip service, but it really is not in effect any longer. BRICS might be one way to go, but at $34 trillion, I mean, the U.S. government interest payments on that debt exceeds our defense budget, and we have one of the biggest defense budgets in the world. Sooner or later, something is going to break. And we're going to wind up like the Weimar Republic, taking an entire wheelbarrow full of paper notes to buy a loaf of bread. And we may come out of it again with the rise of a new political party that says no more private central bank. That's why Adolf Hitler was so hated by the West. When he came to power, he shut down the private central bank imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles, and he issued a value-based currency that did not, it didn't accrue interest debt. And the German economy just lit up. It was called the German Miracle, and Hitler was Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1936. Right. And he was hated for it. Same thing with John F. Kennedy. One of the things that he'd done that made enemies for him was passing a bill to create a new U.S. currency called the United States note. And it was not interest-bearing. It was based on the value of silver held in the U.S. Treasury. And he put about $4 billion into circulation, and the bankers absolutely hated that. And following his assassination on the Warren Commission, they had a man named John J. McCloy, president of the World Bank and president of the Chase Manhattan Bank. And I don't care how good a banker he is, he's not qualified to investigate a murder. So he was there to make sure that the link from the Kennedy assassination to the currency, the United States note, was never looked at, was never exposed. And by the way, after Kennedy was assassinated, the U.S. notes were pulled from circulation. Most of them were destroyed. There are still examples floating around in various collections. Same thing with Lincoln. Following his assassination, his greenbacks were pulled from circulation and destroyed. You know, the bankers want you as their slaves, and they get very, very upset at anybody who wants to show you the path to freedom.
Fascinating stuff. You were bringing up all kinds of stuff that I haven't heard discussed or thought about in quite a long time. And
Well, I'm an old guy.
yeah, a few new things as well. Mike, thank you so much for joining us here today. I appreciate you, man. We're going to keep in touch with you, all right?
Yes, we are, and I had fun today, and let's do it again soon.
WhatReallyHappened.com is Mike Rivero's website, and he's probably got a link over there where you can donate to him and his beautiful wife Claire. So just remember, Mike. Mike here is he's a genuine casualty of the pharma wars and a national treasure to the United States of America. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you very much, and let's do it again.